Welcome back to the show, Matt and Sheri. I am so glad you're here, and I feel like you guys are so brave for talking about this topic. Intimacy, sex. Yes, we're going to have the talk, and we're going to relate it to trust, addiction, recovery. Goodness gracious, I'm glad you guys are the ones going to talk about it, because I don't know what to say about it, but I'm getting a lot of questions lately about this. Some people might have seen you on the show before, but there's probably some people who haven't. So could you introduce yourselves, tell us who you are, and maybe why you're the perfect people to be talking about this on this show?
Well, we're probably the perfect people because we've done it all wrong. So we've got all kinds of experience of how not to do lots of things in relationships. Certainly intimacy is a part of that.
Yeah.
Do you want to introduce yourself, Sheri?
I'm Sheri Salis, partner of a recovered alcoholic. We, like Matt said, did everything wrong. And Matt had a podcast with another person, and then when they bailed, he invited me on, and it was my story, and it kind of seemed to launch like a whole new avenue.
At the risk of insulting Jason, my original podcast partner, it was a big upgrade.
Thanks.
Yeah, you are.
I didn't pay him.
You're the star of the podcast.
So we have just, I don't know, maybe because I don't listen to the podcast if it's just he and I. So I feel like I can be really vulnerable because we've actually even kind of worked out some situations on our podcast of dealing with relationship repair and issues that stemmed from the alcoholic relationship that we had for many years, and my part of being codependent. And so I think because I don't listen and go back, I can just be really vulnerable. And I think that is maybe why we're a good fit here to talk about that.
Because you guys share, not just, there's a lot of podcasts about addiction recovery, but there's not a lot of podcasts where you have both sides of the story, right? Where you have the person in recovery, the person who was with them on the journey, talking about each perspective and what that journey was like before, during, and after. And I think that's what makes what you guys do so special. By the way, the podcast is called...
It's the Untoxicated Podcast.
Not to be confused with Unintoxicated, which I think is what I always want to say, but it's Untoxicated Podcast. And today you guys are going to be sharing with us specifically about sex and intimacy when it comes to addiction recovery. Brave.
Thank you very much. Yeah. We've gotten over a hump. We've talked about it enough that I think we're able to do it with our heart rates under 100 beats a minute.
You often are a little more brave than I am. I'm a little more...
I'm pushing the envelope a little bit, you're saying? Yeah.
But because it is hard stuff, but we have so many people that are dealing with this in their relationships. I feel like now is the time where I can't hold back. Even though I've wanted to for years, I kind of push back on really talking about this. And then I've kind of come to see how important it is in a romantic relationship.
Right. So give us the backstory, if you don't mind, the before story.
So the active addiction story, how it all began? Yeah. So we met, I think, like actually a lot of people that we meet doing this work, we met in college. We worked together in a bar. We both, partied and drank and had a good time, really low on the responsibility scale at that point. We just had to, kind of maneuver our way through school while just having fun and developing a love for each other and a bond for each other. So it was really, really light and casual and great. We moved on after college. We moved in together. We both got adult jobs, like daytime jobs, not bartending at night. And I think right away we noticed a difference in our drinking patterns in that, I grew up in a household where my father came home from work every night and he poured himself a couple of drinks, and that was a sign of manhood and adulthood and success. And so I mimicked that. And Sheri, you thought it was a little bit weird that I drank every night.
Yeah, I was more of a social drinker. Like if I was sitting home, just watching a movie, even just watching a movie with a couple of friends, I wouldn't drink. For me, drinking was all about social engagement and acting kind of crazy and dancing and those sort of things. So for me, just sitting in our apartment after our 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 job, if we weren't going out to a happy hour Friday, I had no interest in drinking. And so also I grew up in a home where my parents were divorced and my father was an alcoholic. So even though I didn't live in the home, I still saw a lot of representation of what how alcohol can be bad, but I still drank. But I feel like I just had more of it's not a daily thing, Matt. Why are you making this a daily thing?
So this is the first time when you start to notice there's like a difference. And you both drank alcohol, but there was a difference in how you viewed the situation and who was doing it.
Yeah, and the difference, I was a budding little alcoholic. I didn't know it at the time, but that was certainly the path I was on. But the other difference that is really noticeable looking back, when we were in college, we had a lot of sex. It was not particularly excellent sex, but it was just kind of carefree, low inhibition kind of sex. The more time we spent together, the more serious we got moving in, talking about engagement, talking about marriage. The weight of it, I think, became heavier for you, Sheri, at the same time as I was becoming less attractive. So I hadn't crossed the line into addiction, but I drank too much and I was handsy and my breath didn't smell particularly good. And you started to get unattracted to me in a sexual way at the same time as, I wanted our sexual prowess, our sexual consistency to continue.
And my idea of like dating in college, we didn't have a whole lot of deep conversations, right? And we were drinking and partying and sex and school, and we had our friends for that. So, I felt like we needed to like mature. So for me, I wanted to be represented more than just a sexual partner and a drinking buddy. And I felt like I wasn't seeing that in the relationship. So I started withholding and trying to take it on as a more mature, a mature person at age 24, but trying to say, let's talk, let's do these things. Let's, I wouldn't even say like I was trying to be more romantic, but just doing things that a more committed relationship where we aren't all about libido was. And you were still there with drinking like you were at a fraternity house and still wanting to have just casual anywhere in the apartment sort of sex.
Another thing that's really important at this point, already I was doing what typically happens for the alcoholic in that I was compartmentalizing. Also, I think there's a gender role here. This is a kind of a male-ish trait, compartmentalization, whereas Sheri would compile interactions. So we could, I could watch TV, watch sports for a couple hours, say something snippy to Sheri, borderline argumentative, and then go to bed and still want to have sex. And all of those things, I could put all those things in a little box. I got to watch my sports and ignore my wife or future wife. Maybe I said something short, but I apologize, so it's fine. And I still wanted to get it on. For Sheri, that was compiling, especially the more time we spent together, the closer we got toward potentially marriage and kids. You started to evaluate me as a whole person. And hey, I don't know that I like the way I'm being treated. And so go to bed at the end of the night. And if I had said something snippy and ignored you all night, that wasn't very attractive to you.
Mm-hmm. So for you, Matt, it was like two different subjects: regular life, sex life. And Sheri, for you, it was like, no, it's all connected in there.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this was before you were even married.
Yeah.
Hard to believe we actually went on with it.
Yeah. At the time, I couldn't see any of this. I would not have understood this first 5 minutes of discussion back then. But now looking back, it's crystal clear. The damage I was doing even before addiction to the relationship, because I just didn't understand what a mature, growth mindset relationship looks like. That's a term you use a lot. Mm-hmm. But as you're looking toward adulthood, you're looking toward something different. We're going to raise kids potentially, and we're going to try to grow more connected. And I was perfectly happy with the way it's always been. Work, drink, sex, great. That's all I needed.
Yeah. And I just kept holding out hope that his maturity was going to catch up with him. Males typically mature slower than females. I am about 18 months older than him, so I have a little bit more lived experience. He had a little bit more of a sheltered life. So I kept just kind of holding out that eventually he's going to catch up, because we did get married and he did have jobs in, middle management, and I kept thinking, when is the maturity going to happen here?
So career maturity happened, but emotional maturity, not as much. I heard one time, I don't know where I heard this, but I heard somebody say on a podcast one time, it's like men get married hoping that their wife will never change, and women get married hoping their man will change. I'm like, dude, that's
that sounds profound.
That sounds exactly like, because I saw all these great things in Matt. I mean, he was in a pretty tough field of school and in kind of a competitive school. So I just kept thinking, well, there's a lot of potential there, so of course the maturity will catch up. Not understanding that, like we've learned now, is that where you started drinking is kind of where your maturity ended in a little bit of ways,
Do you think the sex intimacy issues would have happened even had the drinking not been an issue, or is it too tied in together?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I personally think that it wouldn't have happened because I feel like there were times in the beginning where I would try to explain my feelings about it or share with him, and he had a very fragile ego. So me trying to say, well, this would be really nice, or this would maybe be better for tonight. He would act like I knew nothing about my own body, and that would often lead to arguments. So I feel like if alcohol wasn't there and you weren't at least, a couple beers in or a couple drinks in, maybe he would have heard and received that better, and we could have had those conversations. So I feel like there was that fragile, immature ego.
And I have a different perspective on that. I think it goes back to education. I think we are so poorly educated in the K-2 through 12 public education system as it relates to sex and intimacy isn't even something that's talked about in schools, but that current curriculum is designed toward preventing sexually transmitted infections and preventing unwanted pregnancy, teen pregnancy. And there's no talk about pleasure. There is no talk really to any great extent about the female anatomy. And so, we get out of sex ed in school and we enter our late teen years and early 20 years thinking that it's all about penetrative sex and it's all about duration and size and all of these things that maybe matter for the man, but has nothing to do with pleasure for the woman. So like Sheri said, when she would say, maybe we try this, I would say, no, that's not, I know how to please my woman. And there was some ego there.
That's not what I read.
Yeah. And so there was ego there, but there was just a complete lack of information and lack of education as well playing in. And I really think that my alcoholism in many regards is the best thing that ever happened to us because it shines such a spotlight on so many issues, communication for sure, but intimacy especially, that we couldn't ignore it anymore. And I think
it put everything on fire. Oh, I can see that. I can see both sides.
I think without going through hell, it makes me scared to think we would just have this kind of mediocre, ho-hum, lackluster relationship in a lot of ways, just kind of headed toward our grave as, settling for settling for less than what we deserve.
Mm-hmm. And I know you mentioned, Matt, it's not talked about in schools, but more importantly than that, it's not talked about in homes because that's where it should be talked about. We want the schools to do everything, right? Y'all teach them about that, but it's not talked about in most people's homes.
Oh, you're right. It's so funny because we can come on this podcast and talk openly about sex and intimacy and genitals and body parts and orgasm and all these topics, but it's still even hard for us to talk to our teenage kids about it. We push through. We are giving them more information than what we received when we were in their shoes. But it strikes me how interesting that is, that I can pretty comfortably talk to adults about it now, but I struggle when it comes to talking to our kids. And that's where the education is best delivered at that early stage.
Wow. Yes. And our children are so thrilled with that as well. Not like we have been fully transparent and giving them a real education, but we have, planted seeds for the older ones because we've got we have a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old and kind of planting some seeds that it's more than just about not getting pregnant and not getting a disease.
One of the best things we ever did, if I can plug somebody else's book, we read together. It's a book called Come As You Are. It's by Dr. Emily Nagoski, and it is fantastic. It goes into a lot of details about why a sexual relationship might not be functioning well, and we learned a ton from it. But the beginning part is about anatomy. It's about female pleasure. And, you might think we're in our late 40s at the time when we read this. You might think, what do we need to know about? We know it all. But we stuck to it and read that section anyway, and we came away with a lot of aha moments and a lot of learning. So you're right. It's not talked about in homes with kids. It's not talked about in homes among married couples either.
Right. It's just a hard subject for a lot of different ways or for a lot of different reasons. What would happen in you guys' relationship? Was it just sort of like you guys would fight about it or you would just not talk about it? How did that dynamic play out for you guys?
It's another great question.
Lots of fighting.
Lots of fighting.
Lots of arguing.
Yeah. But so here is a place where in working with other couples, we have realized that there are two paths, and we took one of those two paths. I would argue we took the more destructive of those two paths. As my drinking continued, as addiction eventually took hold, we can point to what we would consider a full decade, a full 10 years of my active alcoholism. Now, as you know, there's no specific diagnosis. A doctor didn't say, I dubbed the alcoholic. We frame that around from the first time I tried to quit drinking until I finally made it over the hump. So from the first time I said, all right, got to put the brakes on here. This isn't working, until permanent sobriety, that was a 10-year period. And in that 10-year period, we continued to have sexual contact. That's, again, one of the two directions this can go. So, I began to need sex as kind of a medicinal replacement for alcohol, or a medicinal addition to alcohol. It became a dopamine, oxytocin kind of a thing for me to have sex. And
like another
exactly. I'm feeling terrible about myself. I don't know that I could put it in those words, but I have depression, I have anxiety, I need something to feel better. And I knew that there were times where I was just using Sheri and using her body to get that hit and feel a little bit better about myself, just the same way I would turn to a bottle of vodka.
So because of the alcoholism makes you more depressed and more anxious, what you're saying is sort of, then I knew this helped me some, so I started relying on it even more. So it wasn't really like a double addiction, but it was like, then I started wanting more intimacy to make myself feel better.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's an important point you make, because I am just finishing up a master's degree in sexual health. I've been in a full compulsive sexual behavior class, and a lot of us alcoholics think we do or did. I never had what you would really call a sex addiction. It was an augmentation. It was an addition. It was helpful. But I didn't, stop going to work so that I could masturbate, or stop going to work seeking sex, paid for sex. I never crossed the line and I'm not trying to excuse my behavior and say I wasn't as bad as somebody else, but a full-blown sex addiction or compulsive sexual behavior, it's interrupting your life. And it never got there for us. It was more, it was another way to find relief from the depression and anxiety. And we talked about the compartmentalization versus compiling. At the same time as I was doing that, Sheri recognized that I was doing that. And for you, it became more and more unattractive, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think...
Wait a minute. Hold on. Sheri, you looked at him and you're like, yeah. I feel like there's a little more behind that. Can I
he does this to me all the time. We'll ask a question and I am like not prepared. Not that I wasn't listening and paying attention, but I was just like going along with some of his script or whatever. And then I'm like, oh wait, now I have a question. So yeah, I feel like I'm listening to him explain like the difference between the addiction and that, and all I'm like laughing in my head is thinking it's like a little shot of Sheri, because my name is alcohol. So like that little dopamine hit. Gotta get a little shot of Sheri. But I feel like when we were doing this, it made him very unattractive. It made him I kind of thought, God, like, what a pig. Like, alcohol isn't enough. It's like, you're just a glutton. Like, those were words that ran through my mind. Like, so it was disgusting and unattractive at the same time as I could like be disgusted and blaming him. It was also just tearing me down. I could just feel like myself being used. And then when I would try to express that to him, by this time, there's been so many arguments. We're so defensive with each other. The relationship is very rocky. We're still pretty stable for the kids. We're running a business together. On the outside, everything looks great. But then nighttime happens, the doors close, the kids are all in bed. And then I would try to say, like, I just feel like I'm being used. He didn't want to hear that. So then I feel even more shut down and feel even more disrespected.
Let me pitch this question to you, because this morning I was sort of looking around in our private membership group, and I was just like looking at some of the questions. And there were two questions right at the top just this morning where the first one was a person was saying, okay, Amber, I've been trying all your positive reinforcement techniques and your get out of the bag I roll, and it's working. But the problem is when I do that and I'm like nice and I do all the things, then he wants to be super affectionate with me, and I can't I'm just not there. And I'm in a, there's just a lot of hurt feelings, lack of trust, probably some disgust, a whole bunch of stuff. And she was saying, I don't know what to do about that. Any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I was right there. I wasn't necessarily trying to get out of that bad role guy because, like we've said, we did everything wrong. But I think because of the way I was like viewing myself, or maybe the era in which I grew up in the 80s, and there was like all those terrible B movies about, girls just put out, but you can't put out too much because then you look like a slut, but you put out enough, so I like felt like it was sort of transactional and a currency. And I had done that in earlier relationships before I met Matt. And so maybe that's why early on he didn't want to hear when I would say, hey, if we do it like this, maybe that was a reminder that I had had other sexual partners before him. So I feel like when that would happen, I would just kind of like suck it up and do it. And then the thing I would say was fine. Okay, fine. I could never say what I wanted. I was already to the point of being like not sharing what I wanted because I didn't want to have sex at all, Right. So I would just say fine and do it, because in our relationship, we lived in a pretty small house and he is an arguer and I would argue back. So it would go all night. So I would appease him and do it and just try to put on a brave face, and I would go elsewhere. Like I would kind of just not even be there in my mind.
You mentioned that it's a small house because we have 4 kids, and a lot of what you did was a sacrifice to avoid arguing because it could potentially wake the kids.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm disgusted with myself to relive that memory, but that's the hard fact.
Yeah. So
is there
I just feel like go ahead.
Is there anything that Sheri could have said looking back? And I know, shoulda, coulda, woulda, but looking back, is there anything she could have said or a way she could have said it that would have maybe got your attention, or it just wasn't going to work at that?
That's a great question. I don't think so, because I leaned heavily on we are married. This is, part of being married. Sex is part of being married. Sex isn't disgusting. The kind of the dutiful wife sex, which again is something that really disgusts me now, looking back on it. I had no idea the damage I was doing. Kind of back to the question that you found within your group. I think it's important to understand that for many couples, for many relationships that are experiencing substance use disorder and trying to have an intimate relationship, for many guys specifically, we find connection through sex and intimacy. That was certainly the case for me. And for Sheri, sex and intimacy is a result of the connection. For me, it was the entry to the connection. And that's a problem. So there's a bit of a gender role there. There's a bit of I was the alcoholic, and that's kind of my side of it. But for everyone, intimacy requires trust. And so really important point to understand is no matter how bad my drinking got, I never lost trust for Sheri. I never had a question about how her moods were going to swing. I never wondered whether or not she'd be good to the kids. I never wondered about, any financial concerns or infidelity or anything. Like, I had solid trust in Sheri because she never did anything to disrupt that. The flip side of that is she didn't trust me at all. You've said you didn't expect me to run our bank account to zero, right, and you knew I'd get up and go to work.
Emotional trust.
Yeah, but no emotional trust. So intimacy, true intimacy, emotional intimacy requires trust. I had all the trust in the world for her. She had none for me, which made true emotional intimacy impossible. And so when we would have physical contact, when we would have sex, and she would say, like you just said, I would say, do you want to have sex? And she would say, fine. Like, she would never answer the question. The question is, do you want to have sex? And she never could answer that. Mm-hmm. That was a big time hurt for me. That is what I have come to call the rejection that's inherent in non-enthusiastic consent. So agreeing to but not really wanting to, that really hurt me. But I was still, there's still that part of me that wants that dopamine hit, that shot of Sheri, like she said. So we would go through with it. And it did immeasurable damage to our relationship. I said that there are kind of 2 sides to this, 2 ways this typically goes in an alcoholic relationship. The other side is that physical contact dries up altogether. And it can be initiated by either side. It can be the person like me who that pain from that rejection inherent in non-enthusiastic consent, that's too much. I don't want any part of that. Or probably more often, it's the spouse, it's the loved one who is just so disgusted by the whole situation that she cuts it off and says no. I would argue that when you get into recovery and you're trying to work on rebuilding trust and work on intimacy repair, you're actually better off to have cut it off than to have done what we have. There's less to repair. There's less resentment to deal with. We had a ton of resentment to deal with, on both sides. I'm not asking for any pity on my side of it. But I was wounded because she was never enthusiastic, and she was massively wounded because of all the times she did it when she didn't want to, just to keep me quiet and appease me and get me to pass out. So tons of damage.
Why do you think it would be better had you guys went the other way and you just stopped having sex?
Because I think then at least, you'd still have to build the trust, the foundation to get back to intimacy, but you wouldn't have all those disgusting memories of bad nights that you have to process and deal with.
And the like breaking down of myself. Like I just, feeling, I don't remember how I stated it once, but it was something like, I just felt like I wasn't there. I was just like above my body, out of my body, whatever. Like I didn't want to be there. And to me, sex became such a disgusting thing because it was just a reminder of kind of a power dynamic shift too, that just made me feel like I had no power over my own body. And that was hard. And I was doing it so there wouldn't be an argument and wake the kids. But I kind of back to the question that your listener asked, like, I feel like because sex would open up connection and vulnerability for Matt, and it does for a lot of people, I don't think that would have been a time where I could have even said, I hope you're feeling good about sex or whatever, but it's really making me feel bad, because I feel like there was never a good time to approach the subject, because in his mind, I think he knew what was going on. It was just never really discovered. You were having your own bad feelings about being, told, fine, we can have sex, but you also knew you weren't getting the connection you needed, but you didn't quite understand it. So again, we were so defensive and protective of our own feelings, and that sort of not open to either side. Like I didn't want to hear that he was being hurt. He was still getting sex. He was still getting an orgasm. Why should he be hurt? So I feel like we were just so raw that any sort of conversation about that would have just led to an argument.
What do you think would have happened, Matt? And obviously you're just going to guess, but if Sheri would have said something to you like, I think you're a lot more sexy when you're sober. if you would sort of try to come more sober, then maybe you get more lucky. Is that leveraging it too much? Would that have incentivized you? What would you have thought about that?
I think it depends on where I was in the cycle. When I was deep in the addiction, I don't think that would have mattered. I would have raised the arguments, like I said, that, we are a married couple. This is what married couples do. And, it's not fair. I would have said things like, when we met, we had plenty of sex and we were both drinking. You're the one that's changed. I'm not the one that's changed. So deep in my addiction, I would have had all kinds of ways to turn this and make it her problem. And she's the one that isn't performing and isn't, I don't mean to use the word performing in that way, but isn't holding up her end of the bargain. Now, when I was in early sobriety, that might have had a bit of an impact. But I think you were so wounded at that point, I don't think you could tell me anything was sexy, because you just weren't there. But it would have been, certainly it would have been leading me in the right direction when I was attempting sobriety and trying to recover.
Yeah, and I think there is sort of a story that's kind of like this, Amber. And I can, because again, I just collect information years and years and years.
You're the compiler.
I have catalogs of stories, but there is a story about he had a business trip, and we had one child at the time, and I flew, and we went, I think it was like for around my 30th birthday, and he was with his, like he was the manager and she was the salesperson, but she was much older. They were very experienced. They were very classy people. And we went to wine country in California, and we stayed at a B&B across from their little house in one of the towns in wine country. So we had this nice day, and it was what in my mind was absolutely mature drinking. You know, we were going to wineries, we were being, tasted, but nobody was getting drunk, and it was just perfect. And we went back to our B&B, and then
whatever rental,
it just at the end of the night, and it was a great time. We had great sex. It was very romantic. And I remember saying to him, this is what I envision, this kind of behavior. But then, when we get on the plane to go home tomorrow, you don't need to drink. And you don't need to drink when we get home. I just thought it was because he was so terrified about over drinking in front of this woman, even though because he was the boss. But it's also that she was just so, so classy. He didn't want to embarrass himself. And I remember saying, this was such a great time. And I had brought it up in years of addiction. I would say, because he would throw back in my face, why can't we ever have good sex anymore? And I'd be like, remember that time? We were having sex a lot, but I could bring back this time where we both, because he was sober enough to remember it, and I was like, but because you weren't drunk, So
you were aware at the time that the factor was the drunkenness?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, he didn't really be he would get moody and broody and furrow his brow, and it just looked like this. He just looked different when he was drinking too, to me. So already by then, he would have one drink, and then I would imagine him throwing on his alcohol mask, and that's who he was, just this beast sort of thing,
So how did you guys bridge that gap? How did you guys start to build trust, and when in the recovery process did that happen?
Ooh, that's a great question. First of all, I think we said this earlier, but we did everything wrong. So one of the reasons that we're willing to talk about it and we want to encourage people to find a way out is because, we're over 7 years sober now, and we're still just kind of crossing thresholds of awesomeness when it comes to rebuilding intimacy. And it takes a long time, but it doesn't have to take 7 years. And so we like to share some of our mistakes along with the things that have worked. And so what I'm about to say, what we figured out, it didn't come right away. It took literally years. The last 3 years, I think, is when we've made the most progress. Mm-hmm. That's when we met Dr. Nagoski's book. That's when we read Dr. Nagoski's book and started to really do the work. But we've come to two realizations when it comes to what the foundation needs to look like to rebuild intimacy. And make no mistake about it, we meet a lot of people that are like, you know what, intimacy, I couldn't care less. That is a back burner thing. I don't trust my spouse. And until there's trust, there won't be intimacy. And one of the things that we had to learn is trust and intimacy are intertwined. They're kind of the same thing, really, true emotional intimacy. And so, intimacy should not necessarily be a back burner issue. It takes a long time to get there, and it deserves the effort and respecting each other. But just putting it to the back burner is a bad idea. So when we talk about the what we figured out and the work that we've done and where we've gotten to, this is all about trust, which is the last bastion of relationship recovery. It's the hardest piece. So there are two kind of foundational pieces to starting the rebuild. And the first one is a safe environment. And I mean a safe environment all the time. Back to what I said earlier about how I can compartmentalize and Sheri compiles. It's not enough for me to be like, we're getting ready to go to bed here in a little bit, so I better be nice for the next 15 minutes and then see what happens when we get in bed. I have to be nice all the time. I have to be respectful. A big part of that for us was coming to the realization that I, for a long time, was the least safe thing in Sheri's life. I mean, we live a typical, cushy, middle-class existence, right? I mean, we have work stress and we're raising kids, so there's stress from that. But we don't have, fear of getting mugged in a dark alley. We're not worried about death and dismemberment, So creating the safe environment and doing it all the time. I reference Esther Perel a lot. Are you familiar with Esther Perel, Amber?
I am. I love her work. She does good work.
Yeah. So the two things that I reference a lot One is, she says, foreplay starts at the end of the last orgasm. And what she means by that is this consistency piece. I can't be ranting and raving about politics and getting the kids all riled up and making Sheri uncomfortable one moment and then, bring that back down a notch and think that everything's fine the next. I need to be consistently even keel. I need to make the environment in the family, in the house, calm all the time. And so, when we say, or when she says foreplay starts at the end of the last orgasm, that's only a little bit about sex. It's really about just being a good partner and being someone that Sheri wants to be around and feels safe being around all the time. That's not important to me. She can rant and rave and then take off her clothes and I'm like, all right, let's go. And so I have to understand that we view things differently. So that foundation is so important. The other piece that Esther says that I believe in so wholeheartedly is, be in our own element. And what I think she means by that is, I need to be a good parent. I can tell Sheri's attraction meter goes up when I do something important with the kids. I have to, go to work and perform there and not come home and just bitch for an hour. It's not to say I can't ever complain about something going on at work, but I need to not just unload all of that on her. I need to participate in the community. I need to do my share of chores around the house. These all go into creating this safe environment. Going to the gym or not losing my hair, which is unfortunately not the direction we're going. These aren't what she finds attractive at this point. That might have been important when we were in our 20s, but it's not anymore. Being consistent and safe is really, really important. And it has to be, pretty much all the time. It's not to say I never make mistakes, but I recognize them in the moment now and say, okay, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I recognize that that was triggering for you and I shouldn't have gone there.
And these are two things that don't happen in a short span of time.
Yeah.
Because his recovery timeline and my recovery timeline were completely different. Like I had to kind of wait him out because he had 6 months of sobriety twice, 9 months of sobriety once, all 3 of those times without any sort of program or help. But I kind of had to wait it out because I was like, I don't feel like I'm gonna, because we did it wrong, I kind of felt like I needed to wait out him a little bit because I didn't want to let my guard down because I hadn't been seeing a therapist. I hadn't done any work on this. So I didn't let my guard down until I saw that he had lasted a year. And then he did something that's a little bit extreme. Like he kind of had a coming out letter to email to a bunch of people, to everybody. And so after that, I kind of felt like, oh, well, now he can't go back to drinking because everybody on his email contact list knows that he is an alcoholic. He's been sober for a year. So that's when I feel like I kind of opened the door to let some work happen. But again, I didn't do anything while he was drinking or in that early stages of sobriety because I didn't know I needed to.
So
I was under the guidance of alcohol.
Looking back, what do you wish you would have done? Like sought therapy? What do you wish you would have done?
Well, I wish I would have sought therapy much earlier, and I had tried that, and it just never really worked out. Insurance timing wise, I just felt like the cost was too much because I was still, even though we blame the alcohol, I was still, once he quits drinking, it's all going to be great.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's not going to be an asshole anymore, a drunk asshole. But I wish that I would have, because then I could have been, having help for some of the things that I brought into the relationship that were being detrimental to the relationship, and could have healed my own past and made myself feel a little bit more confident about the mistakes I made, make me the person I am, and what do I take to learn from those.
Mm-hmm.
Also, maybe I would have detached emotionally a little bit more and then kind of been a gray rock a little more and not gotten myself so worked up.
When you say waited him out, does that mean you put him on like the no sex for a year? Like you may not have said that, but what does that mean? What does that mean?
So I waited out. We didn't stop. Like nothing changed in the relationship as far as sex and stuff. And I guess I just didn't emotionally re-engage with him. I wasn't giving him a whole lot of myself.
I see.
Emotionally, because the way that he kind of came around that I need sobriety was I detached emotionally. It'd be like, here are all of our, things we need to do to make the house operate. Oh, you want to know how I feel? I feel fine. I'm fine. I was that person.
Ooh,
and I didn't want to hear about
I bet the energy coming off of you was like, I can hear that.
And I didn't want to hear about his recovery either, because I had heard it all before, like 10 years of this. Show me your song and dance, but you have to.
It's hard when you're in that position though, Matt, because there's nothing you can say, right? Because you've already said it 2,000 times, right? It's like, you mean it, you're really trying, but it's just like, what do you do?
Well, I had to learn that I had to replace bad memories with good ones, and that takes time. And so for every incident where I drank or I blew up or, had dry drunk behavior or whatever, every time I acted badly, I needed to replace that with a time where I stayed calm. A great example when we talk about this safe environment, I like to use this appliance example, because every time an appliance breaks in our house, YouTube's a great thing now, right? So I try to fix it on my own before we replace it or call a professional. So, the dishwasher breaks and I've got all these parts taken off of it, and I'm laying there on my back in a confined space with a flashlight trying to figure this out. If I'm throwing wrenches and cursing, in my mind, I'm not doing that at Sheri. I'm not doing that at our kids. I'm mad at this appliance. But for Sheri, her nervous system goes up, right? And she's in fight or flight, and the kids go in their room and shut their door. Not because they don't want to hear curse words or they don't want to hear yelling, but because that's a reminder of bad behavior. And so even something like that, where in my mind, I'm not taking this out on my family. I'm taking this out on this stupid dishwasher that doesn't work. Oh no. For everyone else in the household, I'm taking it out on them. So that's why I say it's taken us 7 years to get where we're hoping other people can get much faster. Creating that consistency is all about bad memories being replaced by good memories. And that just takes constant, consistency and doing the right thing.
I am going to throw in one of our poorly orchestrated or poor attempt at trying to rebuild intimacy was, he thought if we just were like not having sex, that maybe I would then create somehow in me, absence make the heart go fonder. No, it didn't. I was very content at that point.
Yeah, she'd have gone for the rest of your life if we could, right?
Care. But it also was kind of a wake up, like we did need to just kind of recreate, or we needed to create a new relationship, not recreate what we had, because it was sucked from the beginning.
Right.
So that was about 9 to 10 months of working on those things, kind of playing with the, celibacy or abstinence. I don't know if it'd be celibacy when you're in a relationship, but kind of playing with those off and on for a little bit of time. And
yeah, that was awful, because every night I'd be like, maybe now is the night that she's crossed over and she's longing for me again. And so I'd come to bed and be like, how's this working for you? And she'd be like, great. I'm over here. I'm going to go to sleep.
And go ahead and just move into separate bedrooms at this point. That's what I was kind of signed up for. And that was like a couple of years into his sobriety. And that was even when I was kind of working with a therapist that just started.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think for women, once you sort of, and I think a lot of women don't know this, but I forget which one of them is it, Matt, that says it's like that responsive arousal versus like automatic arousal. I think a lot of women don't really even understand that about themselves. And so I think a lot of women, if they're not careful, it's like, well, if you would help me around the house, if I could trust you more, they'll lean on that forever. And they maybe even think maybe that would make them more aroused or want to be with their husbands or whatever. But even when those things come in place, you might be more open to the idea, but it doesn't really get the engine going. And I think a lot of women will hold that for a long time.
Exactly, because I had to have that. And then there had to be that trust, which happens over time, and consistency and safety. Then I had to be open to the idea that there was going to be physical contact, whether it was going to result. And I also, part of it is, and I'm probably throwing off your order of notes, but
you go, girl.
Part of it was I really did have to kind of concentrate to say, okay, relax and enjoy this. This is calm, like things have been good between us, things are going well, this is for the betterment of the relationship. But then if I started to feel uncomfortable, or I didn't want to do it, or I could say no and we could stop, and he wouldn't be mad. And but then there was that breakthrough, because I also didn't, realize that there is that response arousal that has to happen, especially when you get to a certain age, you've had 4 kids, your body is like, you don't need to do this anymore.
Right.
Like your brain is like,
there is science behind that. There is science behind the fact that me as the male, my body doesn't know we've had kids. My body is trying to procreate until the day I die. Her body knows she's had kids. And so there are certain hormonal changes that take place that say what desire used to have, which is probably less than mine, not always, but in many cases, the man has more desire. What desire used to have, that's gone now because we already had our kids. And so that dynamic, I think, is important to remember. And that actually leads into the next thing we wanted to talk about. There are these 2 foundational components to starting to bring intimacy back. The one that we've talked a lot about is the safety. And that goes to what you just said, Amber. Hey, if you would do more chores, or you would, be more active around the house, maybe I'd be more interested in you. That's not entirely incorrect. It might not lead to sexual desire, but it will build that safety piece, which is absolutely necessary. The other piece that's necessary beyond safety is recognizing that no one is sexually broken. I think Sheri and I can give a really tangible example here. If I was the king of our relationship and I got to make all the decisions, we would have sex on average 10 times a week.
Good Lord.
Now let me break that down for you. That is 6 nights a week. Okay. Nice. There's probably 1 night a week when I want to stay up and watch the game, or I'm actually tired, like actually too tired to have sex, which I got to be really tired for that. So 6 out of 7 nights a week, I probably want to have sex. There's probably 3 mornings a week where, we're in the nice cozy bed and I roll over and I'm like, oh, this would be great. So 3 out of 7 mornings, I probably want to have sex. And then there's probably over the course of the week, there's one, random kind of kitchen table thing that pops into my head.
Empty or something. Yeah. And you're like, ooh, like.
Yeah. And I'd be ready to go. So,
oh my
so 6 plus 3 equals, plus 1 equals 10. Sheri, how many times a week would...
It means more than once a day is what my mind said. That calculates to more than once a day. That's what immediately I was like.
Sheri, if you were in charge, king of the world, and this relationship, our sexual dynamic was 1,000% up to you, how many times a week would we have sex?
Like now?
Yeah.
1.
1.
1.
Great.
Still, yeah.
Great, and that's up from when I was a drinker.
Yeah.
It was a hard 0.
This is no, never.
Yeah. So, but this is important, and you laughed and giggled a little, and we sure did when we first started talking about this. But desire discrepancy is universal. You're not gonna find someone that wants to have sex as often as you do. And again, it's often the man wants it more than the woman, but sometimes the woman wants it more than the man, and that's totally healthy and natural.
Not always.
And so just recognizing that discrepancy isn't bad doesn't mean I'm broken. We used to look at each other and Sheri, you would think he's a pig, he's horny, he only wants me for my body, and he's selfish. And I would look at Sheri and think she's selfish, she's prudish, she carries resentments and holds out as a result, and she's not doing what she committed to in the relationship. And so even unspoken, there's so much resentment and kind of pain involved in that. And so it's huge. I mean, huge for relationships, even if they don't jump right into bed as a result, but create that safe environment. And then secondly, recognize that discrepant sexual desire is universal, and it doesn't mean either of you is broken. You're both perfectly healthy and normal and fine.
Well, I think in the pain is also shame. If there is that lopsidedness, and then you add alcohol or any substance to it, there's, so much shame in addiction, but there's so much shame that also comes like from your upbringing with sex that plays into this. So I think kind of recognizing that and being respectful of one another, that took a lot, because I had mentioned earlier in the podcast, like, you know, I would feel like he was just a glutton and you felt like I was just a prude and withholding and mean, you know, and then anytime there was conversations about it, the defenses went up, you know, and we would just launch grenades at one another all night long.
Right, because it's like, no, something's wrong with you. No, something's wrong with you.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. For our listeners who are still struggling with addiction, they're still their partners in active addiction, they're in active addiction. What's your advice about the sex thing? I mean, you guys have talked philosophy, but what's the answer? What should happen?
Still in active addiction, you said?
Mm-hmm.
I think from the side of the street of the drinker or the substance user, you can work on certainly one of those foundational components, and it's that creating safety. Because you'll never, you know, it turns out, I used shots of Sheri. I like that. I never heard you say that before. I used the dopamine hits as temporary medicinal things, but I really wanted the connection. I longed for intimacy, emotional intimacy. I just didn't have the words for it. I didn't understand how important that was to me. But that is, I think, a fairly universal human attribute. It's not a woman's side or a man's side. And so that was really important to me. And understanding that that's never coming without safety, I think is really important. Again, because I never lost safety for Sheri. She never did anything to violate my safety, so I didn't get it. So creating that safe environment, consistency, not raising your voice, just not triggering her nervous system. And I don't honestly, Amber, know how you do that without sobriety. Sobriety doesn't fix anything, but in my humble opinion, it's a huge prerequisite because, I mean, what do you think? Would you have ever felt safe around me if I was still drinking, knowing that the potential, even if I had gotten it in control mostly, the potential for disaster was there?
Well, I think because of our early experiences, I already knew that I wouldn't be as open and I was already shutting down, even though you hadn't crossed that invisible line of addiction. I'm also wondering how many of those alcoholics out there that are just disengaged, and maybe they're more of the quiet retreat and hide. Mm-hmm. So they can't have safety in that relationship because they aren't participating in the relationship.
Another sort of dynamic that I run across quite a bit that we haven't talked about is people who have quit having sex because of their drinking. So the drinking has sort of taken the libido away, or even maybe sometimes the function away, and so they've stopped having sex. And I've had several husbands that they've been in counseling. I said, I'm not graduating you till you get at least a second base or something. And it'll be kind of like my funny way, because it's like, it's gone on for so long, they don't know how to address the issue anymore. And then it becomes really awkward because sometimes it's just gone on for years. And so any thoughts about that particular kind of dynamic?
Well, I was just going to say, I feel like we had to interject a little bit of humor, like when we were trying to rebuild that, because, like I said, like there can be shame around sex from your upbringing, mm-hmm. especially if you're like from a really religious background. There's shame there. So adding a little bit of levity and humor, and when you are with a trusted partner with it, it makes it a lot easier. But yeah, like I had to kind of, like I said, I had to like learn to relax and be like, this is going to be fun, to get that responsiveness. But that's where I think the book came in really handy for us, pardon me, was because of just like there is parts of the anatomy that you don't really ever learn unless you seek it out. Mm-hmm. So that helped us a lot, because it also helped us create an environment in which it was easier to walk through those steps a little bit, like understanding what felt good for each other, just to kind of get to first base, then to second base, and kind of moving around.
Yeah. I like the idea of the book, the content. Sometimes I say this even about the videos I make. It works a lot better when you're listening to a video or a book, because it doesn't feel personal, right? I'm like, literally, if a client was sitting in my office and I literally told them the very same thing I said on the video, they would be like, take offense. But it allows both sides, in this case, to sort of absorb information without feeling defensive about it all, because no one's talking like, no one's accusing you specifically or talking specifically to you. It's just like, oh, that's interesting. It allows you to take in information with the walls down, Yeah.
It's just and like, there were times in the book where I felt like we read something and had our own interpretation about it.
I'll put the link in the description, everybody. I'll link it up for you.
So we could discuss it, a little bit, like, well, I thought it meant this and I thought it meant that, So, because you might have that, because I'm sure of course, at the beginning of this, I was thinking, oh, you're reading this book and you're interpreting it like I'm still broken. I'm prudish. So I kind of went in it with a little defensiveness, with a little I don't know,
defensiveness. Yeah,
I guess that's the best word for it.
You mentioned sexual functioning a second ago, and I just want to speak to that. I think it's really important that we understand that the professional interventions for most sexual functioning is psychological in nature. So, when it comes to especially female sexual functioning issues, which is lack of desire, lack of arousal, lack of orgasm, there is no pill. That is all about fixing your relationship, finding trust, feeling confident in your own body, feeling confident in your partner. Those are the ways that you get over those humps. It's almost, I've come to believe there's almost a disservice to men that there is a pill for erectile dysfunction, because it allows you to kind of fake it without actually doing the work that's necessary to create safety and create intimacy and have that communication that is so core to relationship recovery. There's no pill for women on pretty much anything. There is a pill for guys with erectile dysfunction, and it's almost a negative that there is.
Wait a second. Hold on. That's making me have a question. I'm thinking about that as you're saying that. I'm tracking what you're saying, and I'm not a man. That's why I'm asking. So I'm tracking what you're saying about it being psychological for women, right? But even if men work on all that psychology, get the trust in check, does that really fix the bio? I mean, does that fix it like it would fix it for women, or no?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different causes of erectile dysfunction. Sometimes it's diet. Sometimes it has to do with muscle contraction in and around the penis. So there are biological factors, but I'm here to tell you that the relationship dysfunction, the psychological, the stress, the anxiety, the depression, all these things that we know are evils that are hurting our relationship and they're hurting in other ways, they also translate into biological problems. So it's, to say that fixing the relationship, creating trust, going to therapy, addressing psychological interventions will cure everyone's erectile dysfunction, that's not accurate. However, being healthy in those ways will prevent the vast majority of erectile dysfunction. And in many, many cases, I can't put a percentage on it, but someone with erectile dysfunction, a psychological intervention will cure it. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes there's blood flow, there's other stuff going on, but sometimes it is psychological in nature. Enough so that it's worth working on. It's not, I'm not talking about 1%. I mean, it's up there. So It's worth addressing.
So you're saying, you need to figure out those underlying causes. It may be psychological. It may be even like biological, as in like some of the things you're saying, diet, some of these other things that could be addressed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The connection between, neurology, psychology, and biology. I mean, I'm convinced. I don't need any more convincing. We've seen it in both of our lives, not necessarily with sexual functioning, but with pains and like nerve response and, back pain and and then you fix whatever the problem was and that goes away and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened.
Right. It's all tied together. Right.
It is.
All right. So, Matt, you mentioned that you're finishing a master's degree in sexual health.
Yep.
What are you going to do with that?
Well, I'm glad you asked. To finish my master's degree, we are conducting a survey right now. My master's degree program is at the University of Minnesota, and we're actually just launching this spring a survey and then writing the findings and getting published is how I will finish my degree. And we would like to invite your viewers and listeners to participate in our survey. This is formal. This has gone through the Institutional Review Board at the University of Minnesota. So it's very specific what I have to say about the survey. Would you mind if I read the script and invite your people to participate?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. That'd be great.
Okay, great. What is the impact of problematic alcohol use on relationship intimacy? Research has established a connection between drinking problems and relationship distress. Now an effort is underway to dig deeper into intimate aspects of the relationship problems. Researchers at the University of Minnesota are conducting a study to better understand the correlation between alcohol use problems and intimacy issues in committed partnerships. If you are currently in a relationship or have been in a relationship in the past 5 years with someone with a drinking problem and you are at least 18 years of age, you are invited to take a brief, confidential survey. Names and other identifying data will not be collected. The survey includes questions about emotional intimacy, physical intimacy, and sexual satisfaction, and takes about 25 minutes to complete. In exchange for participation in this research, volunteers will receive access to an advanced copy report about the results of the study. For more information and to access the survey, please go to alcoholicintimacysurvey.org.
All right. Thank you. And I will link that up too, so people won't have to remember. We'll put it on the screen and we'll link it below so people can click if they're interested. But you guys would be helping research in general, and you would be helping Matt finish up his master's degree, right?
Yeah. And don't forget that you get access. I think one of the things that's attractive about this to people is for participation. And again, no identifying characteristics. We don't know your name. We can't find you. We can't track you. Like, no one's ever going to find out. But once we tabulate all the information, we will share it with the survey participants so you can look at where you fall. Is my case typical, or am I an outlier? And I think that brings a lot of comfort to people to realize how common their own individual situation is as it compares to other people.
Oh yeah, I want to know the answer too. Yeah, I think people want to see that research. They want to find the findings. Yeah, and then tell us one last time where to find you guys if people want to hear more from you.
Well, our podcast is the Untoxicated Podcast. You can download that anywhere you get your podcasts, and the focus is on relationship issues. We spend a bit of the time talking about intimacy specifically, but maybe for someone who isn't quite there yet, they've got, they're in the throes of active addiction or really early sobriety, and they're not ready to talk about intimacy yet. We cover all relationship-related, alcohol-related issues. We have guests sometimes it's just us, and sometimes we have roundtable episodes with people that are participating in our programs.
I love it. It's a great podcast. I encourage everyone to go check it out because it specifically addresses the relational aspect of addiction recovery. It's like family recovery. And so there's just not many places to get that. I'm so glad y'all are doing it.
We are blessed to have some great guests. Like, for instance, you've been on our podcast 3 times, Amber. So we love interacting with you and working with you. Thanks for this opportunity to come on your channel today.